The King's Choice. You only see my beauty, but you don't know my story. A memoir by Stacey Amawoye, as told to Teresa Laryea. Chapter 7. Adventures in Japan. Behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. Genesis 28:15. New King James Version. I was part of a group of dancers and vocalists who were in demand by most of the musicians around. They wanted us to work and travel with them outside the country for their shows. However, they could not afford to pay for our expenses, so we had to pay for our own way. Unfortunately, since I never had enough money, I was always left behind. So time and time again, I had to stay behind and watch my friends go off with some of the musicians to different parts of the globe. I did not allow this to discourage me, but continued to do my best where I was under the circumstances. But one day, my endurance paid off. A man called Mr. Stone came to Ghana in search of some good dancers, hairdressers, and vocalists to go to Japan as contract workers. As I had experience in all fields, I decided to try my luck by auditioning. To my great delight, I was chosen to travel with the team. With excitement, I started to prepare for this new adventure. My great-grandmother and Pastor Joe lent me some money. Everything went smoothly except for the harrowing process of going through the interviews for a visa. The officials at the Japanese embassy were suspicious of me because, according to them, I did not look like a Ghanaian. My fair skin color, the long length of my hair, and my narrow nose were the culprits. I had to speak in 3 different Ghanaian dialects and had to interpret the meaning of my name to convince them that I was genuinely Ghanaian before they finally approved me. What sealed the deal was when I interpreted my surname at their request. God, who foresees everything, saw it fit to give me a last name which means everyone is going. Somehow that touched my interviewer, and he stamped my visa. Over 1,000 people applied for a visa, but they were all denied except for 3 of us. Words cannot describe the immense joy and wonder that flooded my soul when I was handed my visa. With tears of joy streaming down my face, I beamed at the world. Finally, I felt like my life had just been elevated to another level, and I was about to enter into an experience I had never had before. That day I learned a valuable lesson, that God has a plan for our lives, and we do not need to rush ahead of Him. In due season, He will make things happen beyond our wildest dreams. In His own time, He makes all things beautiful. My great-grandmother was beside herself with joy and thanked God for giving me this opportunity of a lifetime. We had 90 days to prepare for the trip, so I packed with excitement. I even packed gari, a grain made from cassava, and shito, a spicy sauce made from dried fish and shrimps. I was fortunate to have a little pocket money with me. After saying all my goodbyes, I made my way to the airport. My heart was beating fast with pure excitement. As we drove, I had a flashback to some years before when Pastor Joe was about to travel abroad. I went to see him off at the airport, and as we stood waiting for him to board the plane, I felt in my heart that one day I would also board a plane and travel abroad. Looking through the large glass windows, I stared at the airplanes flying in the air and prayed that God would open the door for me to also fly one day, no matter whether my destination was within the country or abroad. I just wanted to soar in the skies one day. While I was caught up in my thoughts, Pastor Joe walked up to me and said, "Don't worry, my child. This is going to be your lifestyle. I know the reason why I brought you to the airport to see me off. Come and let me pray for you." He held my hands and shared a word of prayer with me, after which he told me that this would not be our last meeting. He advised me to hold on to my faith and continue to trust, and obey God and His word. That day, I received an impartation from my mentor to travel and to soar in the skies. From that day onward, I never stopped dreaming. So finally, I stood at the airport waiting to board the plane to Japan. I leaned against a wall while the people bustled around me to and fro. I hopped onto memory lane once again and remembered how as a child I saw airplanes in the sky and waved excitedly at them, promising myself that one day I would sit in one. I slipped back into reality, praying that God would give me success and would not let me come back empty-handed. Finally, I boarded the plane and settled down in my seat. I pinched myself to make sure that I was not dreaming. Finally, we took off, and I was surprised that the intense vibrations and the roar of the jets did not alarm me. It almost felt natural to me, as though I had done it before. I settled back into my seat, relaxed, and enjoyed the long trip to Japan. I looked down at the beauty and the handiworks of God. The landscape and the aerial views were breathtaking. I marveled at how tiny the buildings and cars looked from above. I was in awe at the beauty of the clouds. Transiting through Egypt, we were given an opportunity to tour a bit of the capital. The Egyptian cuisine was delicious. Their women were beautiful, and the people were very hospitable. Finally, we arrived in Japan and were warmly received. We were immediately given a contract to sign. We were not given a chance to even read it thoroughly, so we just signed it and went to our place of residence, which they had prepared for us in advance. It was when we were in the comfort of our rooms that we got a chance to read through the contracts that we had signed. Then it dawned on us that it was completely different from what we had agreed on before the trip. On our first day of work, I met all kinds of people from Russia, Liberia, the Philippines, Ukraine, and many other countries. We got acquainted and made small talk, and then we were asked to perform our welcome dances. Each day we were taken to a theater to rehearse until we became extremely competent entertainers. We entertained people during their festivals and were invited to perform at important events. After each performance, we were taken to a room where we educated people about Africa. As the days went by, we realized that our agents were not paying us the money that they had been given to pay us. I decided to confront one of them, stating unequivocally that I wanted to return to Ghana because of their breach of our contract and the unfair treatment they were giving us. I told them that I felt like I was in prison, so I wanted to go back home. My confrontation had its desired effect because soon after our salaries were increased. After a while, the patronage of our African dances waned, and the language barrier was making it difficult for us to communicate with others, even with our colleagues in the hostel. Though many of the Japanese could speak English, they never did, opting instead to speak their indigenous languages. Some of them pretended not to understand English to motivate us to learn the Japanese language. In spite of the challenges, I fell in love with Japan. I loved their colorful culture, music, and delicious food. They were a people who loved each other and gave valuable pieces of advice to those of us from other countries. Gradually, I became fluent in the Japanese language, even though I used it to communicate for the duration of our 6-month stay. Life was not easy, as we were responsible for our own upkeep. To complement my income, I braided hair a couple of times, but mostly focused on my dancing. Tragically, some of my colleagues were so caught up in making as much money as they could that they got involved in prostitution, lesbianism, and drugs. There were nights when I would see some of them sneaking some old Japanese men into the hostel. Other nights I could hear the sick sounds of their illegitimate copulations, but I remembered all that Pastor Joe had taught me and vowed never to lower myself to adopt such a base lifestyle. And by the grace of God, I held on to my principles, kept myself, and did not compromise my standards. I lived modestly and saved my money to invest in something lucrative when I returned to Ghana. I was able to send some money home to settle my debts and paid all the interest on the loans as well. I was also able to send some money back to my great-grandmother and the salon for the upkeep of my apprentices. Things were going reasonably well until I started having some problems with some of my female colleagues. The cattiness of some of the women started coming out, and envy began to manifest in them. Some of them gathered and gossiped about me. I was the victim of backbiting and false accusations. Even my Ghanaian colleagues, who I considered to be like my family, ganged up on me and betrayed me. They thought I was proud and full of myself because I was not getting involved in their mess. I also had issues with 2 ladies from Russia and Ukraine. They were called Christine and Anya, and they took us for granted. They worked and saved their money and sent remittances back home to their families, but they came and used our hard-earned resources and ate our food. Because they were Caucasians and they were dating some of the agents, they were given more opportunities, while we, the Black Africans, were always sidelined. What was even more troubling was that Christine, who was from Ukraine, read tarot cards and was into palmistry. One day she asked me to allow her to read my palm. I rejected her offer and explained to her that I was a Christian and did not believe in sorcery and fortune-telling. I suppose this offended her, so she got her friends to join her in rising up against me. One day she made the mistake of pilfering my food. After I politely asked her to give it back, she began to rant and rave. In spite of my small physical stature, I knew that I could beat her up without even trying. When she continued with her insults, I landed a nasty slap across her cheek and beat her up until she started begging for mercy. That taught her a lesson and ended her pilfering career. By the time I left Japan for Ghana, she had become one of my good friends. 6 months after I arrived, I was told that I could renew my contract, but by then I was done with Japan and was homesick, so I opted to return to Ghana. By this time, Pastor Joe had introduced me to a gentleman who lived in the United States. I had already received several marriage proposals back in Ghana. Pastor Joe counseled me not to rush into anything, but to pray about it and to take my time before committing to anyone. This gentleman from the States was so interested in me that he decided to meet me in Ghana once I had returned. After I packed my belongings and went back home to Ghana, he followed through and made the trip home. We met each other and became good friends without progressing beyond that. I settled down and began to strategize for the future. Travel to learn character. Julia Pardoe.